Hey there, and welcome back to Utility Sports. I'm Austin. This is Sheldon, and we have our NBA free agency grades. So, just kind of to preface this, this is just the trades and the signings from the offseason here. None of the draft stuff, but just the free agency portion is what we're going to be grading. Please subscribe if you do like basketball, because we do a lot of basketball content on this channel. So, jumping into the Atlanta Hawks, they signed Danilo Gallinari, Bogdan Bogdanovic, Chris Dunn, and Rajon Rondo. They did lose Dwayne Dedman and Jeff Teague. Sean, what do you kind of think about what they did this offseason?
Yeah, so I gave the Atlanta Hawks an A plus for their free agency period. Moves, obviously, they moved Dwayne Dedman, brought in Tony Snell. Honestly, a big part of that is just opening up some money long term. But looking at who they brought in, they addressed the Jeff Teague departure easily, bringing in both Chris Dunn and Rajon Rondo. And in fact, not only did they replace him, they improved over him. That's a big time improvement as a playmaker in Rajon Rondo, a guy who can use and manipulate the pick and roll, and also Chris Dunn, a perimeter defender that'll be a start defender, someone you can play next to Trae Young, and also when Trae Young's off the floor. And then you're looking at the two big ticket pieces, Danilo Gallinari, Bogdan Bogdanovic, some wing shooting presence, some guys who can play off the ball, off of Trae Young, and also give them different dynamics in their offense. Danilo Gallinari can be a guy who puts his back to the basket, shoots a turnaround over both shoulders. Bogdanovic, a guy who can create for himself as well. So you're looking at a much improved Atlanta Hawks team, and they were able to keep some of their youth as well moving forward. So they've got trade assets if they want to, or also just a more well-rounded out team and a team that's going to be a lot more competitive going into next season.
The next team we have is the Boston Celtics. They added Tristan Thompson. They added Jeff Teague, so a little bit of a backup point guard insurance policy. They did lose Gordon Hayward and Wanamaker, but they did give Jason Tatum the max extension for a rookie. What do you think of these moves?
Yeah, so I gave them a B. Overall, I think they had an okay offseason. Obviously, the Gordon Hayward departure on paper looks like it hurts a little bit, but I think they were kind of trending away from Gordon Hayward. Tristan Thompson gives them a slight improvement over Daniel Tice, and also just improves their front court depth overall. Now they can go Thompson to Tice, and really they don't have any net negative center minutes, honestly, in my opinion. Teague obviously just replaces Wanamaker. That's an okay signing. Not really much to write home about there. But then the important thing is they got the deal done with Jason Tatum. They kind of secured their long-term outlook. And honestly, looking at what Gordon Hayward got from the Charlotte Hornets, that's something that wouldn't have been in the books. They would have been really pressed up against the hard cap if they decided to commit to Gordon Hayward. So I think both sides really win here. And I give the Celtics a B because they kind of kept their team where they're at without really making a big move or hurting their long-term stability.
Something else to note about the Celtics real quick is that they might be trading for Nicholas Batum in a sign and trade deal. We'll kind of see how that plays out, so just keep tabs on that. The next team is the Brooklyn Nets. They landed Jeff Green to a one-year deal. He's been a journeyman his whole career. Landry Shamet was a draft night acquisition from the Clippers, but they did lose Wilson Chandler and Garrett Temple, and they did retain Joe Harris for 4 years, $75 million. How do you like these moves here?
Yeah, I think that the Brooklyn Nets had a really, really solid offseason. I'm giving them an A- grade for their free agency moves. Keeping Joe Harris was the big ticket piece there, almost paying him $19 million a year, 18.75 a year on the books. Obviously, a little bit of an overpay on what he is as a player, but you're looking really at the fit. And right now is their window with Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving. This is the year that it really starts with KD coming back from injury. Hopefully, Kyrie can stay healthy all year long. And now you're looking at Harris and also the acquisition of Shamet to gives them, at least one shooter on the floor at all times to play off of the combination of Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. And also looking at Jeff Green gives them a veteran who can play the three, can play the four, even could play small ball five against certain lineups. So you're looking at some versatility there. So I think overall they addressed some of their needs, and their departures weren't really too harsh based on what they were able to keep and add.
So next we have the Charlotte Hornets. They signed Gordon Hayward to the 4-year, $120 million deal. They lost Dwayne Bacon and Willie Hernan Gomez, but they were also able to keep Bismack Biyombo. How do you feel about this?
Yeah, I'm going to give them a B+ here for these moves. Obviously, the Bismack Biyombo deal, not super important for most teams, but I think with the fact that they have two young centers that they just added, I think Biyombo's going to give them rotational minutes this year. I think that's kind of important, especially as a lob catch option around the rim for LaMelo Ball early in his career. Obviously on a 1-year deal there for Biyombo. And then I think the Gordon Hayward signing is obviously the one that pops here. You're looking at a guy who, is coming off of a really harsh injury a couple of years back, kind of really starting to come back into form, averaged almost 18 points per game as the fourth option for the Boston Celtics, and a guy who could probably still score 20 points a game as the lead option, and a player who's going to help LaMelo Ball early. Yeah, it's a slight overpay. Don't get me wrong. At $30 million a year, that's a slight overpay. But Charlotte, they don't attract free agents. So I think being able to draw in a guy like Hayward, a guy who, could possibly be an all-star in the East at some point again, is something really valuable for them, and they get their score next to dynamic playmaker LaMelo Ball.
So next we have the Chicago Bulls. They do not have any key additions so far this offseason. They did lose Chris Dunn, but they were able to retain Denzel Valentine on a 1-year deal. What do you make of this?
Yeah, I'm just going to give them a D+. Sounds a little harsh. They lost one of their better perimeter defenders in Chris Dunn. They were able to keep Denzel Valentine. They just really didn't add much. Obviously, Patrick Williams came in the draft. We're not giving this a grade based off that, though. You're looking at their team. I think they're just trying to run it back. Obviously, under their new direction, Billy Donovan as head coach, Karnisovas as their new GM. And I understand why they're running it back, but at this point, it's kind of hard to give them a positive grade when they've lost one of their top 7 players and didn't really add anything to replace him, in my opinion.
Next team we have is the Cleveland Cavaliers. They added JaVale McGee. They lost Tristan Thompson, but they did retain Dellavedova on a 1-year min. How do you feel about Cleveland?
Yeah, so Cleveland, again, another team that's not going to really receive a good grade here. They lost Tristan Thompson. I think that's an okay move. They set themselves up for this, acquiring Andre Drummond at the trade deadline for a really cheap price. And then they were able to take in JaVale McGee and his 1-year $5 million deal that he had opted into with the Lakers, and they got a second-round pick in the future for him. That's why this grade's partially above the Chicago Bulls, as they got a future asset, albeit a very low-level asset. But nonetheless, they filled that position of Thompson with a player that's an NBA-caliber center, and were able to get an asset. And they're bringing Dellavedova back on a 1-year minimum. I think he's kind of important for their locker room, especially with how young they are at the guard position now with Okoro, Garland, and Sexton. So I think overall they had an okay offseason for where they're kind of at with their franchise, but nothing really to write home about.
Do you see Andre Drummond being re-signed long-term after this season?
That's a really good question. That's something we're going to really have to monitor this next year. I think the Cleveland Cavaliers should be the lead dog for him at this point. I don't really see a lot of other landing spots, especially early on in free agency, as everyone's going to wait for Giannis most likely. He could be a guy that the Cavs do value locking up, and he could be a guy that gets around $16 to $18 million a year, in my opinion. Obviously, at this point, $28 million is quite a bit for him. He's more around that 15 to 18 range, in my opinion. And I think that the Cavaliers should be considered the favorite for him at this point.
Next up, Dallas Mavericks. So they signed Wesley Iwundu to a 2-year min. They acquired James Johnson via trade for DeLon Wright and Justin Jackson. They got Josh Richardson in that trade for Seth Curry, and they got 2021 cap space, which is the big reason ultimately for getting the James Johnson. They lost Seth Curry. They lost Courtney Lee, which is a nothing for them. They retained Willie Cauley-Stein and J.J. Barea. How do you feel?
Yeah, so looking at this, I give them an A grade. Something that, looking at the names on this list here, people aren't going to understand why. Wesley Iwundu on a 2-year minimum is going to be one of the most expendable contracts in the entire league. Any team would be willing to take him for any asset in addition if he doesn't work out. And there's a little bit of upside there. He has defensive potential. He's going to be a guy that you can put next to Luka Doncic and maybe get some more offensive upside out of him as a shooter based on how others have performed with Luka in the past. James Johnson, a guy they really bought low on. He's a player that earned his contract in the past with the Miami Heat, had a really good season for them when he earned that $16 million a year, and now they're buying low on him and getting off DeLon Wright, a guy with multiple years left on his deal, a player I was skeptical of when they first signed him. And then they also bring in Josh Richardson, a guy who is also buying low on, a player that has two-way potential, could potentially increase that three-point percentage. And he's also on an expiring, so there's a way that they could flip him later. And the 2021 cap space is the important part of this deal here for the Dallas Mavericks and why they get an A. They're going to be one of the top 3 teams in the running for Giannis Antetokounmpo. And having that cap space and that flexibility is of utmost importance. That is how you are going to be able to retain Luka Doncic and Kristaps Porzingis while adding in another max slot player. And that max slot player could be Giannis. And if it is, then this instantly becomes an A+ offseason for them because of their flexibility they created by some of their moves.
Next, we have the Denver Nuggets. They did draft some depth, but that's not super, inclusive of this grade. But they did have some key departures: Jeremy Grant, Mason Plumlee, Torrey Craig. They retained Millsap and Bol. But the big thing, I think, for the Nuggets is that they let go of Jeremy Grant and his huge price tag. Sheldon, kind of go into that.
Yeah, so for the Nuggets, I gave them a B+ here. I think being able to bring Millsap back, who had quite a bit of league interest, on a short-term deal was pretty valuable for them. Obviously, able to use bird rights on him to keep him, so that 10 million number doesn't actually really hurt them in any way. Bol coming back on a 2-year 4.2 is cheap, and they're going to really focus on development with him yet. And the fact that they had offered a 3-year $60 million offer to Jeremy Grant as well, and luckily for them, in my opinion, Grant declined that to be a Nugget because he wanted a higher offensive role with the Detroit Pistons. That is a good thing, in my opinion. The Jeremy Grant 3-year $60 million deal is a disaster waiting to happen. He is not a $20 million player. That is going to be one of the worst contracts in the league in a year and a half from now. A lot of people are going to see that. And the Nuggets get a B+ for, quite frankly, avoiding that, even though they offered it.
So next we have the Detroit Pistons. They did add Jeremy Grant. They added Zaire Smith, Josh Jackson, Wayne Ellington, and they lost Christian Wood, however. How do you see this stacking up against the league?
Yeah, so the Pistons here, I gave them a D+. This could easily be an F grade if Jeremy Grant doesn't show signs of improvement on the offensive end. And honestly, I think he's an overrated defensive player. Sure, he gets blocks, but a lot of the time he's just an athletic guy flying at the rim defensively, jumping, and he's a predictive defender, but he's not a guy who's going to sit down and lock someone up. He's not a guy who's a perimeter stalwart. He's a weak side rim protector that just got $20 million a year on a team that isn't set to win. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. I like the Zaire Smith acquisition for Tony Bradley via trade. I think that he's a player that he's only played 13 games. I think he's got some upside. And looking at Josh Jackson, I feel the same way. Sorry. And then looking at their loss of Christian Wood, I think Christian Wood was actually one of the better players on their team, and they lost him for nothing. Really questionable decisions there in Detroit. I didn't really love their draft, and now looking at their free agency moves, I think that they made a lot of mistakes there as well.
Next, we have the Golden State Warriors. The rich get richer, as always. Kelly Oubre via trade. Brad Wanamaker. Kent Bazemore. They did lose Kai Bowman, but the big thing is, the big fish, Kelly Oubre.
Yeah, looking at the Warriors here, I gave them an A grade for their free agency moves. They got Kelly Oubre for a pretty heavily protected first-round pick that turns into 2 seconds if it doesn't convey. You're looking at a player that is going to fit really well next to Steph Curry. Obviously, the Klay Thompson injury hurts what their season's going to look like next year, but Oubre could be a long-term option on the wing for them, gives them some of that depth once Klay Thompson is back. And you're also looking at Wanamaker and Bazemore, 2 guys who are going to provide depth this year. Wanamaker's going to run that backup point guard role, something he did for the Boston Celtics quite well last season. And Kent Bazemore is going to give them a versatile wing who can guard 2 through 4 and also can function as a spot-up guy, albeit somewhat inconsistent, but overall could provide some meaningful minutes for them.
We have the Houston Rockets. They added Christian Wood. They finally got that big that they've been kind of looking for since Daryl Morey's gone. They got Kenny Wooten via waivers. They got DeMarcus Cousins, another big. They also added Sterling Brown on the minimum, but they lost Austin Rivers, Jeff Green, and then Rocco, although they got draft capital for Rocco. How do you feel about this?
Yeah, looking at the Houston Rockets, I give them a B minus. I think I'm higher on Christian Wood than a lot of people around the league. I think Christian Wood uh, is a really good offensive player. I think he can really function in a pick and roll well. And I think with the notion that James Harden will be back for this season for at least the majority of it, Christian Wood's a guy that's going to function really well with them. And I think Houston, they're still trying to win at the moment. They're probably trying to convince James Harden to come back and stick around in Houston. And Christian Wood's a player that's going to help them do that. DeMarcus Cousins is a really, really low risk, high reward signing possibly. I'm not as high on him as others around the league. But I think that there is a lot of value in giving him a 1-year minimum. Kenny Wooten, this guy can jump out of the gym. You can really tell that they addressed the front court. Obviously, something Daryl Morey and Mike D'Antoni decided to tear down together before jumping ship. And the first thing they did was go out and address that. And they got a lot of athleticism in Wood and Wooten, and also some skill in DeMarcus Cousins. And then Sterling Brown's a versatile wing who can guard 2 through 4. I think on a 1-year minimum, that's a really, really cheap deal. And a much better acquisition than some of the other deals around the league. And then look at their departures. Austin Rivers, that one hurts a little bit. You could assume that one was going to happen. Jeff Green, another versatile player. I think that honestly their additions were really quality, but I think they also lost a lot of key players as well. So that's why they kind of find themselves in that B- range.
The Indiana Pacers are next. They didn't have any key additions or really departures for that matter, but they did retain Justin Holiday and Jakar Sampson. So not a lot going on for the Pacers. Do you think that was the right move?
Yeah, I give them a B. Obviously, when you're that 4 to 6 seed in the East, you probably want to be taking some more steps forward than they did. That's why this isn't going to be near an A grade or anything like that. But looking at Justin Holiday, this is a guy who shot 40% from 3 last year, scored about 8 or 9 points a game, I believe. Give him about 3 rebounds, and he's a versatile defender, a player who can guard 2 through 4 again, something that's really valuable in this league. And they got him on a really, really cheap price tag, 3 years, $18 million. That's less than players like Seth Curry make. Obviously, Curry's more of a sniper, but less of a defender. And I think that's a really, really valuable contract. And also bringing Jakar Sampson back on a 1-year minimum is really valuable for them as well. Gives them that wing depth. Obviously, they were tied to Gordon Hayward for a while. Didn't get anything done there, but I think that they made some quality moves to shore up their rotation again.
Then we have the Los Angeles Clippers. They added Luke Kennard via trade with that Landry Shamet deal. They added Serge Ibaka for 2 years, $19 million. Just added Kai Bowman. But they did lose Montrezl Harrell and the floor spacing big in JaMychal Green. They also retained Marcus Morris, whom they traded a first-round pick for this year. And they also have Patrick Patterson back on the minimum. What do you make of it?
Yeah, I'm giving them a B+ here. Obviously, some others around the league would be a lot more harsh, saying that the Montrezl Harrell loss is a really big deal. But I actually think that they improved their roster this offseason. Marcus Morris, getting him back on a 4-year, $64 million deal, that's something that'll be a trade asset moving forward if they decide to not keep him around. And that's right around where his value is. He's getting paid slightly more than Danny Green, and he's a better player than Danny Green. He's obviously, up and down somewhat in the playoffs this past year, but really they're kind of, banking on the pick that they gave up. That's Marcus Morris now for the 4.5 seasons that they've had him, or will have had him. And now looking at who they added Kennard for Shamet. That's an improvement in terms of talent. The fit is a little questionable to me. I think Kennard's going to be a guy who is better suited with the ball in his hands than a guy like Landry Shamet was, but he also gives them some talent possibly off the bench, or he could be in the starting lineup, gives him a little bit of versatility in that way. And I absolutely love the Serge Ibaka signing. Serge Ibaka is a better fit with the Clippers than Montrezl Harrell is, in my opinion, especially when it comes to playoff basketball. You could look at the Clippers running lineups, really big lineups actually, and this could be actually part of their reasoning for doing so is to counter the Lakers. You could see a Serge Ibaka and Ivica Zubac's combination on the floor from time to time. Ibaka can guard 4s, can move out in space, can space the floor, and Zubac can function more as that pick and roll traditional center. This is something that helps them match up with Anthony Davis at the 4 a little bit better than they could last year. They get a more traditional rim protector and a guy who I think just functions better with Kawhi Leonard and Serge Ibaka. I think Ibaka is not as good of a player overall as Harrell, but I think the fit here in Los Angeles is a lot better around their 2 stars, and that's why I'm giving the Clippers a B+ here.
Next up, we have the Los Angeles Lakers. Arguably, you could say won the offseason. They acquired Montrezl Harrell, reigning 6th man of the year. They added Marc Gasol, Dennis Schroeder, Wes Matthews, but they did lose some key guys like Rondo, Danny Green, Dwight Howard, JaVale McGee, Avery Bradley, and they were able to retain KCP and Markieff Morris, but they will also be able to retain Anthony Davis. So what do you kind of make of it? I think it's a win in both of our books.
Yeah, the Los Angeles Lakers, I think to many, are the winners of the offseason. I feel that way as well. You're looking at a team that was able to acquire Dennis Schroeder for a lower level pick, and for Danny Green, a player that, hadn't really performed up to his contract yet at this point. And you get that point guard that you really need to fill in the void of Rajon Rondo leaving. They had assumed he would, and obviously he did to Atlanta. You're looking at not only Schroeder being that six-man option for them as a scorer, but they added Montrezl Harrell with him. Now they have that pick-and-roll duo when LeBron James is off the floor. Something important to notice this year, too, is it's a shorter offseason. We can expect LeBron James to take a little bit more time off probably during the season. Maybe not playing less games necessarily, but playing less minutes per game. They're probably going to try and take some of the load off of him. Obviously, just a deep playoff run recently, and now a really quick turnaround to the start of the season. So having that ball handler and a secondary guy to work with is really important for them. I think Marc Gasol is a really under-the-radar signing as well, a player that could play the five as a traditional five on his own when Anthony Davis is off the floor, can kind of anchor a defense, really known for calling out plays and also knowing kind of what the other team's trying to do in a set, but also a guy who can space the floor offensively, could function next to Anthony Davis, really gives them a lot of versatility. And even Harrell and Gasol could coexist together. You can run that big lineup again, Harrell at the 4, Gasol at the 5 because of the floor spacing. And I think they've a little bit more flexibility offensively than they had last year with JaVale and Dwight.
And we look at the Memphis Grizzlies, not a lot happening for them. They didn't add any key pieces. They had a key departure in Josh Jackson, but they were able to retain D'Anthony Melton and Jonte Porter. Kind of break this down for us.
Yeah, so the important thing to note here, again, for the Grizzlies, this is a grade for the free agency. I think they had a really wonderful draft. They addressed some of their needs around Ja Morant, but this is strictly for the free agency. We think that they could have maybe made an extra move or two, but Melton at 9 years or $9 million a year is a pretty solid value for him as a backup wing. That's gonna be a movable contract down the road, and they're taking a low risk, high reward route on Jonte Porter. Obviously, losing Josh Jackson is kind of a situation. So overall, I'm gonna give the Grizzlies a C-.
Next, we have the Miami Heat. They added Avery Bradley, Mo Harkless on one-year deals. Obviously, it makes a lot of sense just doing the one-year deals for the Heat at the moment. Key departures, Jay Crowder and Derek Jones. It's going to be a little tough to replace, but they were able to retain Bam Adebayo, Goran Dragic, and Myers Leonard.
Yeah, looking at the Miami Heat, obviously the Bam Adebayo rookie max extension, we have a video of that up on our channel. I feel like they pulled the trigger a little too early on that, but it's okay. He's worth the contract. They could have just used the flexibility by waiting, but it's all right. Goran Dragic, I was really surprised that they were able to get him on a 1+1 with a team option. That was a good move for them. Obviously, a little bit of an overpay based on what his value is at $18.7 million a year. But this is something that gives them the long-term flexibility that I've been hoping that they keep. Myers Leonard, that's an okay contract. Again, keeps their flexibility open. Honestly, the reason that they're at a C+ for me and not higher is the loss of Jay Crowder. I think Jay Crowder is a guy that they needed to keep around. Offensively, his functionality next to some of their players like Kendrick Nunn, Jimmy Butler, Tyler Hero is obvious. He can space the floor, has a little bit of ability to take the ball up and down the court. He's one of the higher end players that I guess just really hasn't gotten a lot of love over the years. And I think Mo Harkless is a significant downgrade. You're not going to really have the guy who's going to be able to guard most fours on a night-to-night basis. Harkless is a way less consistent shooter. And honestly, I think that's really going to hurt them long-term. And I don't see them making it back to the Eastern Conference or to the finals this year because of a move like that.
We have the Milwaukee Bucks. They added Drew Holiday. They added DJ Augustine, Bobby Portis, Torrey Craig, Bryn Forbes. Key departures were Wes Matthews, Robin Lopez, and Sterling Brown, but they were also able to retain Pat Connaughton. What do you make of this whole thing for Milwaukee?
Yeah, I gave them a B plus now. They put their chips in on the table. Obviously, the Drew Holiday trade, you're looking at 3 first-round picks that they gave up and 2 pick swaps. That is nearing the value of a superstar level player for a player that I believe is a one-time All-Star, possibly in Drew Holiday, and a guy who, quite frankly, isn't near that superstar echelon. But I understand the pressure on them to keep Giannis Antetokounmpo around. They made a lot of competitive moves. Obviously, the Bogdanovic signing was obviously with that fallout really hurts their offseason. They would have been in that A grade range if they landed Bogdanovic. But I think they recovered okay with Augustine and Portis and some of these lower risk signings, guys that are going to come in and fill a role and fill some positional needs moving forward. And I think, Holiday, it's hard to really give them an accurate grade at this point because this instantly becomes an A-plus offseason if Giannis inks a max extension with them. But it also could instantly become an F grade. Like one of the worst trades, honestly, we've ever seen of the Drew Holiday situation. If Giannis Antetokounmpo decides to leave, they will probably bottom out really quickly, really early on. And you're looking at the New Orleans Pelicans having a huge collection of assets from that trade. And the Bucks could really fall out. It's at this point, I understand their move. I'm going to give it a B plus, but it has really high boom or bust potential either way.
Next team, Minnesota Timberwolves. They added Ed Davis via trade, Ricky Rubio via trade, if you remember on draft night. They lost Jordan McLaughlin, but they do have talks ongoing with him. And they also retain Malik Beasley for a very, very expensive contract. What do you make of it?
Yeah, I'm going to give the Timberwolves an A minus here. The Malik Beasley contract is a slight overpay for sure. He's probably more of around a $10 million a year player in my estimation than a $15 million a year player. Obviously, he played really well down the back end of the season with the Minnesota Timberwolves after going there via trade. So I understand why they paid him what they did. And, down the road, perhaps that is a movable contract again, but I think it'll be a little bit tougher to do so at that 15 mark than the 10 mark. And looking at Ed Davis, I really like that acquisition. They need to add in a forward into the front court, someone who can play physical next to Karl Anthony Towns. It gives them a little bit more lineup flexibility. And looking at Ricky Rubio, I think he's the perfect mentor to come back in, play alongside Anthony Edwards and or Malik Beasley off the bench, whichever one of those two don't start. Or perhaps it could just be Jarrett Culver as well. And he gives them a different dynamic in their offense that D'Angelo Russell does not give them. So overall, I'm going to give them an A minus for their grades. And I'm assuming McLaughlin will come back at this point, but it's kind of tough to really know for sure. So at that point, they're not really looking at a lot of departures. So overall, a pretty quality offseason.
We have the New Orleans Pelicans next. Steven Adams, they acquired via trade. They also obviously got Eric Bledsoe in that trade for Drew Holiday. But they did lose Drew Holiday. They lost Derek Favors and E'Twaun Moore. But the big thing for them this offseason was retaining Brandon Ingram on his max extension.
Yeah, looking at the Pelicans here, you're bringing back Brandon Ingram long-term, obviously a player that kind of emerged last season as an all-star, took steps forward as a shooter, both at the free throw line and behind the arc. And now you're looking at a team that added Steven Adams for a 2023 first-round pick that it has a protection on it. You also added a guy with former all-defense accolades in Eric Bledsoe, basically for free because the Milwaukee Bucks just wanted to get out from him. And you're also big asset here is you got 3 first-round picks and 2 pick swaps for Drew Holiday, a player that, like we had just mentioned, isn't really worth that level of compensation. And if Giannis leaves, they could be looking at a team that really forms a dynasty there in New Orleans around Zion Williamson, could have a lot of top 5 picks. Possibly there's potential that trade doesn't go quite as hopeful for the New Orleans Pelicans, but overall, you got to love the risk that they took with that trade. They got what we believe is the highest value they could have ever gotten for Drew Holiday. And they also made some other complementary moves around their team.
Then we have the New York Knicks. They added Alec Burks, Austin Rivers, Jacob Evans, and Amari Spellman, but they did lose Bobby Portis, Mo Harkless, Wayne Ellington, but they were able to bring back Alfred Payton. So what do you make of these kind of lower level moves for them?
Yeah, look at the Knicks. I'm going to give them a C plus here. It's important to note that they got, I believe, 3 second rounders from the whole Ed Davis situation. They took in 2 seconds to take his cap hit, and then they also got a second rounder from the Wolves to acquire him. Quite an interesting situation there. But the Knicks now, picked up some of those future assets. Austin Rivers, I think, is a really quality signing. I think they're, Bobby Portis, they obviously let him go because of the money that they had committed to him previously. Honestly, it's a whole bunch of moves that are like on the docket. They're like, okay, quality moves, but they're nothing really that moves the needle overall, what they did in free agency. That's why it's only a C plus, but I don't think they made any mistakes really. I think that every move that they made, they had pretty good reasoning in why they made it. And I think that they're, slightly improving. It's just not enough really to move the needle for me.
For the Oklahoma City Thunder, they acquired a very quality player in Al Horford and George Hill. They also had Kenrich Williams in the Steven Adams deal. Taking a look at the departures, they lost Danilo Gallinari. Obviously, they lost Nerlens Noel, and they traded Steven Adams and Chris Paul. They didn't really retain anyone. So kind of break down why it's so important that they acquired Horford.
Yeah, looking at Horford, I think that he is actually one of the better parts of their offseason. They were able to flip Danny Green for Horford and also acquire a first and a second round pick in that trade with the Philadelphia 76ers. And Horford's a guy next to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander that will probably start to excel again in a role, and he'll succeed there, and he'll probably get moved again for a future first round pick in my estimation. He's got 3 years left on his deal at this point. After this season, it'll be 2 years left on his deal, and that's a lot more of a swallowable contract, especially after the summer of 2021 when a lot of teams have cap space. And whoever misses out on Giannis will be interested in Al Horford, in my opinion, a player that can really help a lot of teams. And I think that he's going to have a pretty solid year with the Thunder. The reason I only give him a C, though, they lost Danilo Gallinari in a sign and trade. They got a 2025 second rounder there. Pretty much nothing to write home about. They lost Nerlens Noel, Steven Adams. Obviously, via trade, they got a 2023 first. That's kind of nothing, in my opinion. Honestly, long term, I don't think that pick's going to mean a lot to them. And looking at Chris Paul, they traded him for a first, Oubre and Rubio, and then they flipped Rubio for basically nothing. I think that they really sold Rubio way too cheap. And I think that they also sold Oubre a little early. I think Oubre could have played there, helped his stock out a little bit. And instead, they decided to flip him early for a future asset that might not even convey. So you're looking at the Thunder, they've been very active in the marketplace, but I don't think a lot of their trades really holistically make a lot of sense. They've got 18 first-round picks now in the next 6 years, but you only have 15 roster spots. It's going to be kind of interesting to see what they actually fill their roster out with, because a lot of these picks could be in the 20s too. You're looking at, players like Terrence Ferguson again, possibly. That's not really high value to me. And I think the Thunder could be in a world of pain if they don't hit on some of these selections.
Now we have the Orlando Magic. They only added Dwayne Bacon. They lost DJ Augustine and Wesley Iwundu. They were able to retain Fournier because he did opt into his contract. Michael Carter-Williams signed a 2-year deal, and James Ennis on a 1-year deal. So what do you kind of make of this? I feel like this is a lot of low-level moves once again for the Magic.
Yeah, again, they didn't really move the needle. In fact, they got a little bit worse. They lost DJ Augustine, one of their top 6 players. They did address that point guard need in the draft, Cole Anthony, but remember, this isn't a grade based on the draft. This is just free agency moves. And quite frankly, Cole Anthony isn't going to have the impact DJ Augustine did this upcoming season. He's, going to take a couple of years to really get into that starting level point guard role. And looking at the Magic, Bacon, he replaces Iwundu, but they're a team that's consistently been the 7 or 8 seed in the East. The East got better this year. Atlanta Hawks made some important moves trying to improve their roster. And now you're looking at a team that could potentially be looking at a 9 seed in the East if everything goes right for Atlanta, or also could just be sticking around that 8 seed, and I don't think that's the place you want to be. That's why I'm giving the Orlando Magic a D.
Now we have the Philadelphia 76ers. They added Seth Curry. They added Tony Bradley in a trade. They have Dwight Howard on a 1-year deal. They acquired Danny Green, obviously, for Horford. They did lose Josh Richardson, through the trade. They lost Burks, Raul Neto, Zaire Smith, and they didn't really retain anyone. So what do you kind of make of all these different moves that they made?
Yeah, Sixers were quite active, something many could have predicted with Daryl Morey coming into town. He likes to work the trade marketplace. He gives a lot of teams calls. And I think at face value, some of these trades aren't really necessarily where the value is. I think he overpaid for Danny Green. But every single move he made did address, did have a good reason behind it. He was addressing need and fit quite clearly. Seth Curry and Danny Green, two consistent shooters, especially Seth Curry, one of the best shooters in the NBA. And you're kind of putting that floor spacing element back around Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid, something that's badly needed there in Philadelphia. And then he also went and addressed the backup center minutes after sending Horford out, got Dwight Howard on a one-year minimum. I think that's a really good value deal. And also Tony Bradley, a player that has kind of been up and down, but defensively has a lot of potential. He's a big center, really long-armed. And I think there's a good low-risk, high-reward buy for the Sixers, giving up Zaire Smith for them. So overall, I'm going to give them a B+. I think that their moves made a lot of sense in terms of what the need is. And I think Daryl Morey's trying to turn that thing around and get them back into a second round or Eastern Conference Finals team.
Then we have the Phoenix Suns. They obviously added Chris Paul, which was one of the big highlighted moves of the offseason. They lost Ricky Rubio and Kelly Oubre via trade. But they also were able to retain Dario Saric on a 3-year, $27 million deal. How do you like this holistically?
Yeah, one important thing here for the Suns, I forgot to include Jay Crowder under their key additions. He was a 3-year, $30 million addition as well. And I love what the Phoenix Suns did this offseason. They went out and got Chris Paul for Rubio and Oubre, a pretty substantial upgrade over Ricky Rubio. Even though I like Rubio as a player, I think Chris Paul is a little bit more dynamic as a scoring option, especially in the pick and roll game, something they badly needed next to obviously Devin Booker. And now they get that combo forward and Jay Crowder, a guy who him and Sarge are going to fill up those 4 minutes. They could play small even with Sarge at the 5, Crowder at the 4. And I think that they've got a lot of different lineup versatility now. And I think that they've greatly improved their shooting ability from the outside. Now they got a squad around Devin Booker. I think that this is a team that could be vying for that 8 seed in the West. Obviously, it'll be interesting to see how the Warriors do this year without Klay Thompson. And there's just right now the back end of the West is kind of interesting. There's going to be a race for 8. Obviously, with the play-in style is going to be quite interesting to monitor. But I think the Phoenix Suns are one of the winners of the offseason.
Then we have the Portland Trailblazers. They added Robert Covington via trade. They added Derek Jones Jr., Harry Giles, but they did lose Whiteside and Wenyen Gabriel. They also were able to retain Carmelo Anthony and Rodney Hood. How do you like the fit with Robert Covington and the rest of the guys in Portland?
Yeah, the fit there is perfect for Robert Covington. I think he's going to be a guy that can slide in as the starting small forward if they decide to go that route and start Carmelo at the 4. Oh, and Covington is a versatile defender. Obviously, we saw that in Houston, playing basically center for them on the defensive end of the floor. But also a guy who gives them some spacing options. Not the best shooter in the league by any stretch, but a guy who's a consistent threat from there. You can't leave him open. And Derek Jones, I like the low-risk signing on him and using their mid-level exception for him, a player that gives them some athleticism, something that's badly needed. In Portland, obviously very based off skill. Now they get a high flyer, someone who can give them a little bit different of a dynamic. And they were able to retain Carmelo and Rodney Hood, 2 important pieces there for them moving forward. They really improved their wing spot, and that was their biggest weakness coming in. And honestly, their departures, Whiteside, somewhat important, but Zach Collins, his health is ultimately more important than Whiteside there anyway. So you're looking at a team that has more versatility and a better overall roster going into next season.
Then we have the Sacramento Kings. They didn't add anybody in free agency or really via trade, but they lost Bogdan Bogdanovic, lost Harry Giles, lost Yogi Ferrell, lost Kent Bazemore, but they were able to ink De'Aaron Fox to the rookie max extensions. What do you make of this?
Yeah, this has got to be the team that struggled the most through free agency. Obviously, new management came in. It's not really fair to say, here's your losses, because these are these aren't the executives that brought these players in. Obviously, they want to probably take the team in a new direction. But just looking at it, the one that hurts the most is losing Bogdan Bogdanovic. For nothing, obviously, the failed sign and trade with the Milwaukee Bucks. They had planned on getting DiVincenzo, a player who has some defensive upside and offensive capabilities. That fell through. So now you're looking at the Kings as a team that the only thing they really got done was they extended De'Aaron Fox to a rookie max. And at this point, $31 million for De'Aaron Fox is a little bit of an overpay based on what we've kind of seen from him. I think he's more of a $24-25 million type player. Obviously, it's only $6 million a year, and if you're Sacramento, you're probably not using that somewhere else anyway. But at this point, I'm going to give them a D-. They have a lot of needs. They didn't address any of them, and they lost one of their better players for nothing. Hopefully, Buddy Hield can emerge, and hopefully they want him to stick around long term. Maybe that's part of the whole Bogdanovic leaving and not matching that offer sheet. But that's yet to be seen. So at this point, the Kings have a really, really bad offseason.
Then we have the San Antonio Spurs. Once again, didn't have any key additions, but they did lose two shooters in Bellinelli and Bryn Forbes, but they were able to retain Jakob Poeltl and Drew Eubanks. So what do you kind of make of this?
Yeah, obviously the lack of additions, something that you don't really love to see if you're San Antonio, a team that I think needed to make one or two moves to really kind of solidify themselves back into a strong contender for that 8 or 7 seed in the West. Obviously lost some shooting with Bellinelli and Forbes going to Milwaukee, but they were able to keep Poeltl, a guy at $9 million a year. I really like that contract long-term for them. He's a really good rim protector, gives them somewhat of a roll threat as a pick-and-roll guy. And I think Eubanks is also a guy who kind of flies under the radar around the league. They got him for a really, really cheap contract. Remember, that's less than what Jonte Porter just got in Memphis under long-term team control. Kind of bolstered their front court long-term, so I'm going to give them a C. I think they need to make some moves, but their retentions were really good.
For the Toronto Raptors, they had one key addition in Aaron Baines, but however, they did lose some big men in Ibaka and Gasol, and they also lost Rondé Hollis-Jefferson. But the big things for them this offseason were the retentions. They retained Fred VanVleet on a 4-year deal and Chris Boucher on a 2-year deal. I think that's a pretty big win if you're looking at the retention side of things.
Yeah, it definitely is. You're looking at the departures, and you're seeing Serge Ibaka and Marc Gasol, your two of your most important front court players behind Pascal Siakam. That's a big loss. Most teams wouldn't have been able to recover from that. You see the Raptors getting back their guy in what would have been a really open market for VanVleet. I feel like he was probably one of the most coveted free agents in this class for teams like, say, Charlotte or Detroit or a few other places. Getting him back at just over $21 million a year, I think is right around where his value is. And I also really love the Chris Boucher retention. He's going to be a guy, right now I'm going to tell you all, whoever's watching, he's going to be a most improved player of the year candidate this season. He's going to take a big step forward, gave him $6.75 million a year. That's not really based off production at this point, but he's going to be a guy that's going to come in, fill that Serge Ibaka role early. He's a freak athlete. He's big, lengthy, and long, and he can protect the rim, can get out and run in space, and I really, really like him for the Raptors. Overall, the B- grade is just because they lost Ibaka, obviously one of the most versatile front court players in the league. But at the same time, they did a good job recovering from that. So a B- grade isn't too harsh, and you're going to look at them being another team that they feel like they're in contention again next season.
Then we have the Utah Jazz. They brought back Derek Favors on a 3-year, $30 million contract. They lost Tony Bradley. But the big thing for them is the 2 retentions, getting Donovan Mitchell back on his max extension and Jordan Clarkson on the 4-year deal. You had to get those guys back. How are you feeling about the Jazz?
Yeah, the Utah Jazz took care of business, like you said. Donovan Mitchell coming in at the rookie max, that's an obvious. You don't even think twice about it. He obviously really showed out in the playoffs this year, despite losing in Game 7 against the Nuggets. And then Jordan Clarkson at just over $13 million a year. That's right where the value is for him as a bench scorer. He really emerged there after being acquired from Cleveland in the past. And now they reward him with a pretty long-term contract, but a really low-risk contract in my eyes. And I think Clarkson will be the long-term 6-man in Utah. Obviously, they just got new ownership and a team that's really, intent on winning and trying to put a competitive product on the floor. And I think they did that this offseason.
Then we have the Washington Wizards. Not a lot in terms of free agency other than the Davis Bertans signing or the retention. 5 years, $80 million, a lot of money for a stretch big like that. They also added Robin Lopez and Raul Neto. So what do you kind of make of this here?
Yeah, looking at the Wizards, I'm going to give them a B minus. Keeping Bertans was really important. This is under the notion that John Wall will be back, so you're looking at a starting five of Wall, Beal, Avdia, Bertans, and possibly either Lopez or Thomas Bryant. That's a quality starting five. That's another team that's going to be making a run at that Eastern Conference spot. Another reason why I feel like the Orlando Magic needed to do a little bit more. But now the Wizards here with Bertans, obviously has his defensive limitations. But gives them that stretch option, an elite stretch option, can get a shot off on a one dribble pull up from deep. Obviously an elite catch and shoot threat, and now also adding Lopez, albeit a slight overpay on what his value actually is, gives them some front court depth alongside Thomas Bryant. And overall, I think the Wizards deserve a B minus for this. NATO's a low level addition, but obviously important for depth. So I think the Wizards did all right for themselves. And that's our 30th team there.
All right, thanks everybody for watching. Please subscribe if you do love basketball. Please also leave a like if you did enjoy the video. We will be pumping out more NBA offseason content as it progresses. There's a few key guys on the market yet that we will do videos of, so we do appreciate your support, and we can't wait to see you in the next video.